The morning mist clung to the fertile valleys of Oregon like a protective shroud, masking the desperation in Rosa Martinez's eyes as she guided her battered pickup truck along the winding dirt road. Her 4 children sat in uncomfortable silence. 8-year-old Miguel clutching his younger sister, Carmen's hand, while twins Isabella and Diego pressed their faces against the fogged windows. The truck's engine wheezed with each hill they climbed, mirroring Rosa's own labored breathing as she fought back tears. Behind them lay a life of fear and bruises. Ahead stretched the unknown promise of Sunset Valley Ranch, where a classified ad had offered work to anyone willing to tend gardens. Rosa whispered a prayer in Spanish, her grandmother's voice echoing in her memory with ancient words about seeds planted in faith. The ranch sprawled before them like a painting, left half-finished, its once manicured fields now surrendering to weeds and neglect. Ben Harrison stood on the wraparound porch of the main house, his weathered hands gripping a cup of coffee that had long grown cold, watching the morning light reveal another day of mounting debts and dying dreams. At 52, he carried the weight of 3 generations of Harrisons who had worked this land, and the bitter knowledge that he might be the last. The vegetable operation that had once supplied half the county now struggled to fill a single farmer's market stall, and each passing day brought him closer to the inevitable auction notice. His wife Sarah's greenhouse stood empty, its glass panels catching the sunlight like tears frozen in time, a monument to the cancer that had taken her 2 years ago. Along with his will to fight, Rosa's truck coughed to a stop in the gravel driveway, its silence suddenly making her children's nervous whispers seem thunderous. She smoothed her dark hair back into its practical ponytail and checked her reflection in the rearview mirror, seeing her mother's determined jaw and her grandmother's gentle eyes staring back at her. The children watched her with the tension of those who had learned too young to read adult emotions for signs of danger or hope. Miguel, the oldest at 8, had appointed himself protector of his siblings, his small shoulders carrying responsibilities no child should know. Rosa opened her door and stepped onto the Oregon soil, feeling its rich promise beneath her worn sneakers, while the sweet scent of wild blackberries mingled with the earthy smell of fertile ground, waiting for someone who understood its language. Before we continue, leave your like, share our story, and subscribe to the channel. Thank you. Ben descended the porch steps as Rosa approached, her spine straight despite the uncertainty flickering in her dark eyes, and he found himself struck by the quiet dignity in her posture. "Mr. Harrison, I'm Rosa Martinez. I called about the gardening position," she said, her English, careful but clear, tinged with an accent that reminded him of summer evenings and his grandmother's stories. Behind her, 4 pairs of eyes peered from the truck windows like cautious deer, and Ben felt something twist in his chest at their obvious wariness. "I didn't realize," he began, then stopped himself, seeing how her chin lifted slightly at his hesitation. The morning breeze rustled through the dying vegetable rows, carrying with it the weight of unspoken needs and the fragile possibility of unexpected salvation. Rosa's hands, he noticed, bore the calluses of someone who had never been afraid of honest work. And in that moment, everything he thought he knew about his situation shifted like soil after the first spring rain. "My children and I, we're looking for a fresh start," Rosa continued, her voice gaining strength as she spoke, the words carrying years of suppressed dreams and desperate hope. She gestured toward the neglected fields with an expression that Ben couldn't quite read, not pity, but rather the look of someone seeing potential where others saw only failure. The twins had climbed out of the truck and were chasing butterflies among the wildflowers that had claimed the edges of what used to be Sarah's prize-winning tomato patch. Their laughter, a sound Ben hadn't heard on his property in far too long. Carmen remained pressed against the truck window, her thumb in her mouth, while Miguel stood guard beside the driver's door, his young face wearing the protective mask of a child forced to grow up too fast. Rosa watched her children with fierce tenderness, then turned back to Ben with eyes that held both vulnerability and unshakable resolve. "I know you might have concerns, but I can work harder than any man you'll find, and I understand plants the way my grandmother taught me, not just how to make them grow, but how to make them thrive." Ben studied her face, seeing something there that reminded him of Sarah's quiet determination, the same steel wrapped in silk that had helped his wife transform barren ground into abundance. The morning sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the ranch, and in its light, he could see the scope of his failures, spread out like an accusation, row after row of stunted vegetables, neglected irrigation systems, and greenhouses that stood empty as monuments to his grief. Yet as Rosa's gaze swept across his land, he saw not judgment, but possibility, as if she were seeing not what was, but what could be. Her children had grown quiet, sensing the importance of this moment, their future hanging in the balance of adult decisions they couldn't influence but would certainly bear the consequences of. The silence stretched between them, filled with unspoken questions and carefully guarded hopes, while somewhere in the distance, a meadowlark sang its liquid song over fields that had forgotten the sound of laughter. Ben realized that this woman and her children weren't just asking for work, they were offering him something he'd thought was lost forever. The chance to watch his land come alive again. The position doesn't pay much, Ben said carefully, his voice rough with morning coffee and unspoken emotions. Watching as relief flickered across Rosa's features like sunlight through storm clouds, she nodded quickly, too quickly, and he understood that whatever she was running from had left her with few options and fewer resources. The twins had discovered an old tire swing hanging from a massive oak tree, and their delighted squeals filled the air as they took turns pushing each other, their joy infectious despite the uncertainty of their situation. Miguel approached slowly, his protective instincts warring with natural curiosity as he examined the ranch equipment scattered around the barn, while Carmen finally emerged from the truck to stand close beside her mother, her small hand finding Rosa's with the automatic gesture of a child who had learned early that safety came only from staying close. Ben watched the family dynamics with growing understanding, recognizing the careful choreography of people who had survived by taking care of each other. "There's a small house on the property," he found himself saying, surprising himself with the decision even as the words left his mouth. "It needs some work, but it's got good bones and a view of the valley that Sarah always said was worth more than money." Rosa's eyes widened, and for a moment her carefully maintained composure cracked, revealing the desperate hope she'd been trying to hide. "We would be very grateful for any shelter you could provide," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, as if speaking too loudly might shatter this unexpected blessing. Ben led them toward a small cottage nestled among a grove of apple trees, its white paint peeling but its structure sound, with a wraparound porch that had been Sarah's favorite place to shell peas and watch the sunset. The children ran ahead, their earlier caution melting into excitement as they discovered the tire swing's twin hanging from another tree, and a vegetable patch that, though overgrown, still showed signs of careful planning in its layout. Rosa walked slowly through the space, her hands trailing over the porch railing, her eyes taking in every detail with the intensity of someone who had never taken shelter for granted. "I grew up in gardens like this," she said softly, more to herself than to Ben, "where my grandmother taught me that plants respond to love just as much as water and sunlight." Ben felt something loosen in his chest as he watched her face transform with possibility, realizing that perhaps this arrangement might save them both. The cottage's interior was sparse but clean, with 2 small bedrooms, a kitchen that still smelled faintly of Sarah's herb collection, and a living room dominated by a stone fireplace that promised warmth during Oregon's notoriously damp winters. Rosa moved through the space with practiced efficiency, mentally cataloging what they would need and what could wait, while her children explored with the cautious excitement of those who had moved too many times to fully believe in permanence. Miguel tested the water pressure in the kitchen sink with the serious demeanor of a much older child, while the twins discovered a window seat in the living room that looked out over the valley, their faces pressed against the glass as they watched. Clouds cast moving shadows across the distant hills. Carmen found a small closet under the stairs that was just her size, and when she announced it would be perfect for hiding from monsters, Rosa had to turn away to hide the tears that threatened to spill. The house felt like sanctuary, but Rosa had learned not to trust feelings that came too easily, and she found herself cataloging escape routes even as she allowed herself to imagine what it might feel like to truly come home. Ben showed them around the property as the afternoon sun climbed higher, painting everything in the golden light that made Oregon valleys famous among photographers and dreamers. The barn held equipment in various states of repair, testament to Ben's declining ability to maintain everything alone, while the empty greenhouses stood like glass cathedrals awaiting resurrection. Rosa examined everything with the eye of someone who understood the relationship between tools and soil, between human effort and natural abundance, asking questions that revealed a depth of agricultural knowledge that surprised Ben with its sophistication. Her children spread out across the property with growing confidence, Miguel gravitating toward a small workshop where he began organizing scattered tools with the methodical precision that spoke of too much responsibility carried too young. Twins discovered a creek that ran along the property's eastern boundary, its clear water tumbling over smooth stones, while Carmen found a family of barn cats who allowed her to pet them with the patience that animals reserve for gentle souls. As the sun moved across the sky, Ben found himself seeing his land through Rosa's eyes, noticing not just its failures but its enduring possibilities. Feeling something stir to life in his chest that he'd thought died with Sarah. "I should warn you," Ben said as they walked back toward the cottage, his voice carrying the weight of honesty that comes from having nothing left to lose. "This place has been struggling since my wife passed. I'm not sure how much longer I can keep it running." Rosa stopped walking and turned to face him, her expression serious but not discouraged. And in her eyes he saw the reflection of someone who understood that life rarely offered guarantees. "Mr. Harrison," she said, her voice steady despite the enormity of what she was about to propose. "I don't know much about running a ranch, but I know about making things grow, even when everything seems hopeless. My grandmother used to say that the earth never stops believing in tomorrow, even when people do." Her children had gathered around them, sensing the gravity of the conversation, their faces reflecting the guarded hope of those who had learned to expect disappointment but still dared to dream. The evening light was beginning to slant through the apple trees, casting long shadows across the yard, and Ben realized that this moment felt like standing at a crossroads where one path led to surrender and the other, two possibilities he hadn't dared imagine. "If you're willing to take a chance on us," Rosa continued, "we're willing to take a chance on this place." The handshake that sealed their agreement was firm and brief, but it carried the weight of mutual desperation transformed into shared hope. To people choosing to bet their futures on each other despite having every reason to protect their hearts. Rosa's children gathered around them as the first stars appeared in the Oregon sky, their young faces reflecting a mixture of excitement and apprehension as they realized that this beautiful, broken place might actually become their home. Ben felt Sarah's presence in the evening breeze that rustled through the apple trees, as if she were giving her blessing to this unexpected family that had arrived like an answered prayer he'd been too proud to voice. The cottage windows glowed with warm light as Rosa began settling her children for their first night, and for the first time in 2 years, Ben fell asleep to the sound of voices in his empty house. Children's laughter drifting across the yard, like a promise that tomorrow might hold more than just another day of barely holding on. The land itself seemed to exhale in relief, as if it too had been waiting for gentle hands that understood the ancient partnership between human hope and soil's patient fertility, ready now to reveal what miracles could grow when tended by those who believed in the impossible. Dawn came softly to Sunset Valley Ranch, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold that seemed to promise new beginnings. And Rosa was already moving through the neglected garden rows with the purposeful stride of someone who had found her calling. She knelt beside a patch of stunted tomatoes, her fingers gentle as she examined their yellowing leaves, diagnosing years of improper care with the instinctive understanding her grandmother had passed down through generations of women who had coaxed life from reluctant soil. Ben watched from the kitchen window, his morning coffee forgotten, as he observed the way she moved among the plants like she was reading a story written in leaf and stem, her face reflecting both assessment and compassion. Miguel had appointed himself her assistant, following her with a notebook where he carefully recorded her observations, his 8-year-old penmanship struggling to keep pace with his mother's rapid Spanish as she muttered plant names and treatment plans. The twins chased butterflies between the rows while Carmen collected smooth stones in her pockets, all of them unconsciously creating the soundtrack of a working family that the land had been missing for too long. "The soil has good bones," Rosa announced as Ben joined her in the garden, her hands dark with rich earth as she crumbled it between her fingers, testing its texture and moisture with the expertise of someone who had learned to read the land's needs before she could read books. She pointed out where previous plantings had depleted specific nutrients, where water had pooled and created problems, where the natural flow of the land had been ignored in favor of geometric precision that looked neat but ignored nature's wisdom. Ben found himself learning as much in one morning as he had in years of struggling alone, watching Rosa work with the kind of intuitive knowledge that couldn't be taught from books, but had to be passed down through generations of successful gardeners. Her children moved around them like satellites in a comfortable orbit, each finding their own way to contribute. Miguel organizing tools, the twins weeding with competitive enthusiasm, Carmen arranging rescued plants in a makeshift nursery she'd created near the cottage porch. The morning sun climbed higher, warming their backs as they worked, and Ben realized he was experiencing something he'd almost forgotten: the deep satisfaction of shared labor with people who cared about the outcome. By midday, Rosa had transformed Ben's understanding of his own land, showing him drainage patterns he'd never noticed, pointing out microclimates created by the barn's shadow and the wind patterns channeled by the surrounding hills. She moved through the greenhouses like an archaeologist, uncovering Sarah's old seed collection and recognizing varieties that Ben had thought were lost forever. Her excitement infectious as she explained how these heirloom tomatoes and peppers could form the backbone of a specialty crop operation. "Your wife, she had very good taste in plants," Rosa said softly, holding up a packet of seeds labeled in Sarah's careful handwriting, and Ben felt his throat tighten at the unexpected connection between the woman he'd lost and the woman who might help him save what she'd built. The children had claimed the largest greenhouse as their play area, and their voices echoed off the glass walls as they created elaborate games among the empty planting benches, their laughter bringing life to spaces that had been silent for too long. Rosa watched them with the divided attention of a mother who could work efficiently while maintaining constant awareness of her children's safety and happiness, a skill Ben was learning to admire as the foundation of her quiet strength. The afternoon brought their first real test as customers, drawn by word of mouths about the ranch's revival, began arriving to purchase vegetables for the weekend farmers market, only to find the usual supply sadly diminished by years of declining production. Rosa stepped forward when she saw Ben's embarrassment at having to turn people away, her natural warmth and genuine apologies turning disappointment into curiosity about the ranch's future plans. She found herself describing her grandmother's 3-sippers planting method and the benefits of companion gardening with such passion that several customers left their contact information, asking to be notified when the new crops were ready. Ben watched in amazement as Rosa transformed potential business disasters into relationships, her children serving as living proof of the family-friendly atmosphere she was unconsciously creating, their presence making the ranch feel like a community gathering place rather than just another commercial operation. By evening, Ben realized that Rosa hadn't just brought gardening expertise to his failing ranch, she'd brought the kind of authentic human connections that turned customers into supporters, neighbors into friends, and a struggling business into something that might actually have a future. The first week settled into a rhythm that felt both foreign and familiar to Ben, the sound of children's voices and Rosa's soft Spanish creating a soundtrack that the ranch had never known but somehow seemed to have been waiting for all along. Rosa worked with methodical intensity, dividing her attention between immediate repairs needed to salvage what remained of the current season's crops and longer-term planning for a complete renovation of the growing operation. She had a gift for explaining complex agricultural concepts in ways that made sense to Ben, teaching him about soil pH and companion planting while her hands never stopped moving, weeding and pruning and transplanting with the fluid efficiency of someone who had been born to this work. Miguel had become her shadow and translator, his quick mind absorbing both English gardening terms and Spanish plant wisdom as he helped bridge the gap between his mother's knowledge and Ben's learning curve. The twins had established themselves as the ranch's official butterfly counters and flower arrangers, while Carmen appointed herself caretaker of all injured or abandoned plants, creating a hospital corner where she tended seedlings with the serious dedication of someone who understood that small things needed extra protection. As the second week began, Ben found himself looking forward to Rosa's morning assessments and afternoon progress reports, her presence having become the organizing principle around which his days now revolved. She had a way of making even the most mundane tasks feel purposeful, whether they were repairing irrigation lines or reorganizing the tool shed. Her belief in the ranch's potential transforming Ben's relationship with his own land, her children, had integrated themselves into the ranch's ecosystem with remarkable speed. Miguel proving to have inherited his mother's green thumb as he successfully nursed several dying plants back to health, while the twins had memorized the names and locations of every animal on the property and appointed themselves official greeters for visiting customers. Carmen had found a special connection with the barn cats, who followed her around like devoted disciples, and her presence had somehow made them friendlier to everyone else as well, as if her gentle spirit was contagious. The cottage had come alive with the sounds of family children arguing over bathroom time, Rosa singing softly in Spanish while she cooked. The evening ritual of homework and bedtime stories that reminded Ben what a home was supposed to sound like when it sheltered people who belonged together. Asterisk. The first serious challenge came in the third week when Ben discovered that several rows of Rosa's carefully tended seedlings had been damaged overnight. Their stems cut with the precision that suggested human sabotage rather than animal mischief. He found Rosa kneeling among the destroyed plants, her shoulders shaking with suppressed emotion as she cradled a severed tomato plant in her hands, and realized that success had made them visible to people who preferred the ranch's previous failure. Miguel stood beside his mother with clenched fists, his young face twisted with anger at seeing her work destroyed, while the twins huddled together near the cottage, their usual chatter replaced by the wide-eyed silence of children who had learned to recognize when adults' problems threatened their safety. Ben felt a rage building in his chest that surprised him with its intensity, not just at the destruction, but at the way it had wounded people who had already endured too much. And he found himself making a promise he hadn't known he was prepared to make. "I'll find out who did this," he told Rosa, his voice carrying a protective edge that made her look up at him with surprise and something that might have been gratitude. "And I'll make sure it doesn't happen again." The investigation revealed uncomfortable truths about neighbors Ben had thought he knew. Jealousy and resentment that had festered while his ranch struggled, now sparked into active hostility by the visible improvements Rosa had brought to the operation. Mrs. Patterson from the adjacent property admitted her husband had been concerned about those people bringing down property values, while Jim Morrison from the feed store suggested that perhaps Ben should consider whether he was really helping by giving work to someone who might not be here legally. Ben felt his understanding of his community shift and realign as he realized how quickly prosperity could turn neighbors into enemies, how easily fear could masquerade as concern for property values and community standards. Rosa listened to his report with the weary resignation of someone who had faced such prejudice before, her hand unconsciously moving to Miguel's shoulder in the protective gesture that had become second nature to her, while her children absorbed the lesson that success could be as dangerous as failure when you were different from the people around you. The damaged plants couldn't be replaced at this stage of the season, representing not just lost income but lost hope. And Ben watched Rosa calculate the setback with the same quiet strength she'd shown when facing all their other challenges, her resilience both inspiring and heartbreaking. The next morning brought an unexpected ally when Dr. Eleanor Chen from the County Agricultural Extension Office arrived unannounced. Having heard about Rosa's innovative growing methods from one of the customers who had visited the ranch, she walked through the gardens with professional interest, asking detailed questions about Rosa's companion planting strategies and soil amendment techniques, her enthusiasm growing as she realized she was witnessing traditional knowledge being applied with remarkable sophistication. "This is exactly the kind of sustainable agriculture we're trying to promote," Dr. Chen told Ben, her eyes bright with the excitement of someone who recognized excellence when she saw it. And Rosa's methods could serve as a model for other small farms in the region. Rosa stood quietly beside them, her natural modesty warring with pride as her techniques received professional validation, while her children watched with growing understanding that their mother possessed knowledge that other adults respected and wanted to learn. The visit concluded with Dr. Chen's offer to document Rosa's methods for the Extension Services demonstration program, potentially bringing both recognition and protection to their operation, transforming their isolation into an opportunity for broader impact. The vandalism incident and Dr. Chen's visit seemed to catalyze something in Rosa, awakening a confidence that had been buried beneath years of fear and uncertainty. And Ben watched with growing admiration as she began sharing her knowledge more freely with other farmers who sought her advice. She developed a weekly consultation schedule, teaching sustainable growing methods to neighbors who approached her with curiosity rather than hostility, her children serving as living advertisements for the family-friendly atmosphere she created. Wherever she worked, Miguel had become fluent in agricultural terminology in both languages, serving as interpreter when his mother worked with Spanish-speaking farm workers, while the twins had appointed themselves official tour guides for visitors who wanted to see the Three Sisters planting method that had become Rosa's signature technique. Carmen had established herself as the ranch's animal whisperer, able to calm spooked horses and coax eggs from stubborn hens with the same gentle persistence she brought to nurturing damaged plants. her presence having transformed even the live's behavior in ways that made the entire operation run more smoothly. That summer reached its peak with the ranch producing more diverse and higher quality vegetables than it had in over a decade. Rosé's techniques having transformed not just the soil, but the entire ecosystem in ways that continued to surprise Ben with their interconnected benefits. The customer base had expanded beyond the local farmers market to include restaurants from 3 counties, chefs drawn by the exceptional flavor and appearance of vegetables grown using traditional methods that enhanced rather than fought against natural processes. Rosa had begun teaching classes on weekends, sharing her grandmother's wisdom with gardeners who drove from as far as Portland to learn techniques that couldn't be found in agricultural textbooks, her reputation growing through word-of-mouth recommendations that valued authenticity over academic credentials. Her children had found their own roles in the expanding operation, Miguel maintaining detailed harvest records that impressed even Dr. Chen with their accuracy, while the twins had developed a thriving cut flower business that added beauty and additional income to the ranch's offerings. Carmen had become the unofficial mascot of the educational programs, her ability to make nervous visitors feel welcome turning every class into a community gathering that strengthened the ranch's connections throughout the region. The success brought new challenges as Rosa struggled to balance her expanding responsibilities with her children's needs, the demands of running an increasingly complex operation, testing the careful equilibrium she'd maintained between work and motherhood. Ben found himself stepping into gaps he hadn't expected to fill, helping Miguel with homework when Rosa was called away to handle irrigation problems, reading bedtime stories to Carmen when her mother was too exhausted to manage their usual routine, gradually becoming the kind of stable male presence the children had never known they needed. The cottage that had seemed like adequate shelter now felt cramped as Rosa's teaching materials and agricultural references competed with family life for space. And Ben began to understand that their arrangement would need to evolve to accommodate the success they had achieved together. Rosa noticed his increasing involvement in her children's lives with a mixture of gratitude and apprehension, her protective instincts warring with the recognition that Miguel, Isabella, Diego, and Carmen were thriving under Ben's quiet attention in ways that her love alone hadn't been able to provide. The summer evenings found them sitting on the cottage porch together after the children were asleep, sharing coffee in comfortable silence while fireflies danced among the vegetable rows, both of them aware that something fundamental was shifting in their carefully defined professional relationship. The crisis came without warning on a sweltering August afternoon when Rosa collapsed while teaching a class, her body finally succumbing to months of 18-hour days and the accumulated stress of years spent in survival mode. Ben found her unconscious among the tomato plants, her face pale beneath its summer tan, surrounded by concerned students who had immediately called for medical help, but stood helplessly beside the woman who had seemed inexhaustibly strong. The ambulance ride to the county hospital became a blur of medical questions Ben couldn't answer and forms he had no legal right to sign, his helplessness in the face of bureaucratic barriers highlighting the fragile foundation on which their partnership had been built. Miguel rode beside his unconscious mother with the stoic composure of a child who had learned too young that adults could disappear without warning, while the twins and Carmen waited at the ranch with Dr. Chen, who had arrived for a scheduled consultation only to find their family in crisis. The diagnosis of severe dehydration and exhaustion required a 3-day hospital stay. 3 days during which Ben discovered how completely Rosa's presence had become the center around which not just the ranch but his own life revolved, her absence leaving him to face how much he had come to depend on the quiet strength of the woman who had arrived asking only for work but had given him back his reason for believing in tomorrow. Rosa's return from the hospital came with doctor's orders for reduced activity and mandatory rest periods, restrictions that chafed against her drive to maintain the momentum they had built but couldn't be ignored without risking her health and, by extension, her children's security. Ben found himself insisting on changes that Rosa initially resisted, hiring additional help and redistributing responsibilities in ways that forced her to accept that the ranch's success now depended on systems rather than her individual heroic efforts. The children responded to their mother's vulnerability with the kind of protective care that spoke of roles reversed too many times before. Miguel taking over meal preparation with surprising competence while the twins managed household chores with military precision, and Carmen appointed herself Rosa's constant companion, monitoring her mother's rest periods with the dedication of a trained nurse. Dr. Chun's suggestion that Rosa apply for a state grant to formalize her educational programs offered a path toward financial stability that didn't require physical labor, but also represented a level of institutional visibility that made Rosa nervous after years of deliberately avoiding official attention. The cottage felt different now, charged with unspoken questions about permanence and belonging. As Ben's increased involvement in their daily lives forced all of them to confront what kind of family they were becoming, and whether they had the courage to make it official. The grant application process revealed how much Rosa's work had already transformed the regional agricultural landscape. Letters of support pouring in from farmers, chefs, and extension agents who credited her methods with improving both crop yields and environmental sustainability across 3 counties. Ben found himself serving as her advocate and translator, helping her navigate bureaucratic language and institutional expectations that were second nature to him but foreign to someone whose expertise had been passed down through oral tradition rather than academic credentials. The paperwork forced them to articulate goals they had only discussed in abstract terms, planning 5-year projections and educational curricula that assumed a level of permanence neither had dared to hope for. During Rosa's desperate first weeks at the ranch, Miguel threw himself into the application research with scholarly intensity, gathering statistics and creating charts that demonstrated his mother's impact with the precision of someone who understood that numbers could protect the people he loved in ways that feelings couldn't. The twins and Carmen contributed hand-drawn illustrations of the ranch's gardens, their artwork capturing the joy and beauty that Rosa's work had brought to the land with an honesty that formal documentation couldn't match. While Ben realized that somewhere along the way these children had stopped being Rosa's children and had become theirs, the evening they submitted the grant, Ben found Rosa on the porch, her gaze heavy with hope and fear. She worried no one would understand their vision, but Ben reminded her that perhaps they wouldn't. It might only be the beginning. Inside, her children's laughter carried the life she had built from nothing but determination. For Ben, it was proof that Rosa had given him more than help. She had given him family. The grant's approval came with the harvest. Rosa's shaking hands clutching the letter that promised security for her children and the ranch alike. Their joy filled the valley, while Ben wept with relief, knowing Sarah, his late wife, would have loved this new life. Rosa was officially recognized as agricultural director, her expertise transforming desperation into leadership. That fall, the ranch's festival drew visitors from everywhere, and Rosa's quiet pride turned the farm into a symbol of abundance grown from community and love. Their success attracted attention from universities and organizations, pushing Rosa into the spotlight she never sought. The children embraced her new role, Miguel helping with schedules, the twins acting as guides, Carmen charming all with her innocence. As she and Ben worked late into the nights, their bond deepened into something unspoken but permanent. Yet peace shattered when Rosa's ex-husband returned, threatening custody of the children. The fear in Rosa's eyes and the children's instinctive defense reminded Ben what was truly at stake. Faced with legal threats, Rosa leaned on community support and Ben's relentless fight for protection. At dawn, he proposed not out of romance, but as a shield for her family. Rosa accepted with tears of relief, and soon after, they married quietly, their vows more about survival and trust than passion. The union gave them legal standing and a sense of permanence. When the courts dismissed her ex-husband's case, the children could finally breathe, their laughter returning as Rosa wept with gratitude for safety at last. Seasons turned, and the ranch flourished under Rosa's guidance, her methods saving neighbors during drought and inspiring future generations. Conferences, workshops, and festivals spread her influence far beyond their valley. While at home, the family grew into a unit bound by respect, resilience, and love. What began in desperation became a story of renewal, a ranch reborn, a family rebuilt, and proof that abundance grows not from wealth or power, but from the courage to plant seeds of hope in the darkest of times.